Adam,
Yes.
did you know God had a Chinese son?
I heard something about that, and I hear it didn't go very well.
Well, let's find out. Hello and welcome to Revolutions of Our Time, the podcast where we explore revolutions past and present. I'm Sam, and joining me, as always, is one of the newest residents of Bristol. How are you, Adam?
I'm good. Yeah, new resident of Bristol. That's very strange. I'm going to be here for a bit. I narrowly missed the Hot Air Balloon Festival, which I'm devastated by, but, you know, that'll come around next year. Otherwise, doing good. How are you?
I'm recording in a pretty warm closet today, so let's see if we can get through this without me sweating too much. To the audience members that aren't aware, Bristol is in the West Country. It has a very distinctive accent.
I'm in the provinces, yeah.
Yeah, pay attention to Adam's R's and see how pirate they become over the next year.
It's famously where Blackbeard is from. When the first time I came here was last December, and because it was December, I was looking for mulled wine, and it's surprisingly hard to find in Bristol. They have no truck with any of that foreign muck, only mulled cider for the Bristolians.
Oh yeah, cider is a religion out there, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Nice.
It is very good as well, to be fair.
It is. And mulled cider, yeah, mulled cider is very good. Mulled wine, great as well. We kind of have neither in the US. Maybe I'll start a growing empire. Anyway, I'm going to skip the niceties up front. We're going to skip the Independence Day because we have a behemoth of an episode today, and one we haven't necessarily tried before, in that we're delving deep into history. We've done some history before. We've done Protestant Reformation. We've done some more recent history as well. But today is sort of an anthology of sorts, and we are going to be exploring the Taiping Rebellion. So we will be skipping the Independence Days this week, since this episode will most likely be in at least two parts. Adam, have you heard of the Taiping Rebellion? Do you think other people have heard of the Taiping Rebellion?
I have heard of the Taiping Rebellion, and whilst lots of people have heard of it, I'm sure, probably not as many people as should have heard of it given the scale of the conflict. And even as someone who's heard of it, I don't know very much about it.
Yeah, and I didn't as well. And I first heard about it in my master's program because it's sort of seen as a footnote in history despite how many people died.
We've alluded twice to that already. And just to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it is the second bloodiest conflict in history in terms of number of casualties.
It's hard to rank specifically, but between 20 and 30 million people died. And that's the consensus number. There are some higher estimates of up to 70 million, though that's more if you kind of put into like, oh, the children that weren't born, right?
Right.
But even to those that have studied Chinese history, this is really seen as a little footnote in Chinese history. Part of that is because of the time place in which it takes place, which is the mid-1800s, 19th century, which is known as China's Century of Humiliation. This is an era that the Chinese largely would like to forget. Famously to historians that were watching the 2008 opening ceremony at the Olympics, China ran through their 5,000-year history through dance and music, and it was very detailed, but there was about 120 years of history that was pretty recent that was missing from that display, and that was about 1790 to 1910-ish. And that was sort of the period when the Europeans were just ravaging the country of its resources, and it was the lowest period of recent Chinese history. So for that reason, it's not studied much in China, but because it's also Chinese history, it's not studied much in the West either. And when it is remembered, it's often remembered for shallow or distorted reasons. Kind of like the premise, which we've talked about before, which is that this guy said that he was Jesus's brother and then started a rebellion, and then 30 million people died. And that's sort of the extent it's known by most people that have heard of it.
That is the extent of what I've heard of regarding the Taiping Rebellion.
I mean, I wrote it off sort of as a bizarre religious cult, which it kind of was, but it can also be seen as a failed revolution doomed by the fanaticism that started it, and others leave out the history altogether. Perhaps this is because it challenges the tidy Western narratives about progress and religion and revolution, especially at the time when Christianity was seen as the pacifying force, the civilizing force of the world. Europeans were sending missionaries wherever they could at the time, and this was a result of Christian missionaries, so maybe they don't want to feel that responsibility. The reason we're going to look at the Taiping Rebellion as a cap to this run of Christianity episodes I've done is one, it's going to provide a bit of fun to dive into this history, but it can kind of inform us today how religion and revolutionary politics can fuse into powerful social movements, how charismatic leaders can inspire the oppressed and also drag them into disaster, how foreign powers intervene not for justice but for profit and control, and how the promise of liberation can unravel when ideals and practice collide with one another.
So nice and light.
Nice and light. And for today's protesters and revolutionaries, the Taiping is more than a strange footnote. It can be a warning, a lesson, and in some ways, even an inspiration. So by studying their story, we can ask ourselves, how do we avoid repeating their mistakes while carrying forward a vision of a more equal world? Which not a lot of people talk about that part of the Taiping Rebellion. And in a lot of ways, that's not what it became at all. But those were the roots of the mission at the start. I'm widely using two books that have a myriad of source material in them. The first one is God's Chinese Son by Jonathan Spence. And this was published in 1997. So it's a little bit dated in terms of its historical rhetoric. I'm going to be using a lot of the terminologies from this book. So for example, Peking instead of Beijing, which scholars were using for a long time, that form of Chinese to English translations. He's a professor of Chinese history at Yale University and widely regarded as the expert of the Taiping Rebellion in the English-speaking world. And almost all of his sources in this book come from the historical records in China and him delving deep and reading the actual texts themselves in Chinese. Some of the other material is backed by one of his former students, and that book is Autumn in the Heavenly Kingdom, Stephen Platt, who is a professor of Chinese history at University of Massachusetts Amherst, but got his PhD at Yale under Spence. Those are our sources today.
Okay.
I will be skipping over many things. So, Adam, I encourage you to stop me with any questions or clarification.
Okay.
Because I will be jumping around a bit, and I want you to be my check to the audience to make sure this all makes sense. Okay?
Okay, we'll give it a go.
So, to understand the world we're in, we need to understand China at the time. This was the Qing dynasty, so China is widely seen to be a bit different from Western history and political structure in that China as a concept, as sort of a nation, but more of a kingdom, has existed in some form or another for about 5,000 years, with each kingdom changing hands with a new dynasty, a new family that takes over. The borders might shift during this process, but the way the Chinese understand their history is that this is a continuous China, just ruled by different dynasties. So this was the period of the Qing dynasty, which took China out of the Ming period, and the Ming were known as keeping China very isolated, which kind of changed a lot of courses of history. The Ming ruled from the 14th century to the 17th century. So this was a period where Europe emerged from feudalism into colonial powers, and the Ming's isolation kind of left Asia ripe for European pickings without their influence. Not that Chinese colonies would have been much better, who knows?
Well, the way that I understand the early days of the Ming and something that led to the isolation was that the Ming did send explorers out to see the world. There is some contested evidence to suggest that there was an explorer called Zheng He, who may have been to America, but the way I believe at least the Chinese understand it is that the Chinese did see the world and were frankly unimpressed. Because Chinese civilization was so advanced compared to much of the rest of the world at the start of the Ming dynasty.
His boats were famously very ornate and gigantic. Like, they rolled into the Persian Gulf and were just accidentally crushing the boats that the Arabic traders had. But yeah, so after being unimpressed with the world, the Ming went into isolation and really solidified a lot of Chinese culture. They were huge on the Confucian examinations, which had been going on for thousands of years, but the literacy rates in China were extremely high among peasantry compared to other nations. And that's because in China, they have examinations that you start at the little local level, and if you pass those, you get to the county level, then the province level, and the people that do well at the province exams get to go to Beijing, or in the Ming, it was Nanjing, a different city. But you would go and you would study then at the imperial academies, and that's how they found their bureaucracy. It was really a form of meritocracy. That being said, once these administrators got to those roles, they still did live like lords and petty kings, but the way in which they got there was in part due to their intellect. At times, obviously, a rich son has a lot more opportunity to study and prepare for these exams, so it still was, the rich in a lot of these positions, but in theory, the poor could ascend the ranks in China. Now, the Qing dynasty, which took place at this time, Qing spelled Qing. They're a bit different. They took over from the Ming. They were not ethnically Han Chinese. They're Manchurians from the northeast. And they brought some of their traditions with them. For example, if you see that stereotypical depiction of a Chinese person with like a shaved head but a very long ponytail, that's the Manchurian style. And they enforced that all men have that haircut in the empire.
All men, period, or all men like in bureaucratic governance?
From what I understood, it depended on sort of where you were, but by the time of the 19th century, all men generally had this. It was pretty taboo not to have this haircut. The Qing did expand China to the furthest extent of the borders that China had seen. This included Tibet, this included modern Mongolia, pushing the border down to like the borders of Vietnam.
Korea?
I believe they controlled it for a time, but the Japanese had taken it by this point in our story. So a lot of the territory that like Taiwan and China claim today were Qing borders. But this expansion and also not having a base of support because they were Manchurians led to a lot of paranoia within the Qing's administration.
So the rise of the Qing dynasty historically coincides with sort of the earlier phases of European colonization, like American colonies have been founded, maybe?
Yeah, this would be the mid-17th century when the Qing took over.
Mid-17th century.
Yeah.
Okay, so early, like, American colonization.
Yeah, and you start seeing European expansion to the east as well. You see, like, Dutch colonies in Indonesia, and in the Chinese sphere, you had Portugal first on the scene in Macau in around that time. But then by the 1800s, with Europeans knocking on the doors, the Qing became very paranoid. So they closed off the country, just as the Ming had, but for this time, for different reasons. It was they wanted to push off the influence from Europe. And the system of Western trade into China, when we begin our story, which is 1836, there was only one port that the Europeans could legally access, and that was the port of Canton, which is modern-day Guangzhou, which is in the south. It's near modern-day Hong Kong. It's a huge city today, but it was a huge city back then as well. When you're looking at scale on Chinese history, if you're used to reading European history, the populations are just so much bigger. Like, China had the capability. Not only was the land extremely fertile throughout, like, they cultivated rice rather than wheat and grain, so that could feed a lot more people, which is kind of why you see India and China with the populations they have today. It's because farming practice, but also the land itself. The name Canton is actually a mispronunciation of Guangdong by the first Portuguese traders that were there, and it just kind of stuck. I mean, you even have the English word for the language there is Cantonese, right? And obviously many European nations wanted in on the Chinese trade, but they could only trade in Canton, and they could only trade outside of the walls. They had specified docks that each nation set up a warehouse at, and any foreigner caught within the city would be put to death. So they traded in the shadows of these massive walls with tens of thousands of people behind them away from the Europeans. And it was just specific traders that would be able to trade with them, as well as sort of the boat people that weren't ethnically Han that plied their trade up and down the river.
And Europeans were desperate for Chinese goods, as I understand it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. The Qing were presented with the same offers by the British that the Ming had received, but even more so now that the British had pillaged Africa and the Americas and India. They presented the Qing emperor with all these goods that were seen as incredibly valuable. And famously, the emperor said, "I don't want any of it. We have everything we need here. If you want any of our goods, you must pay in silver."
Yeah.
That would be incredibly costly for the British. This led to the opium trade. So Britain, which controlled the subcontinent of India, where these poppy seeds were cultivated, and they established this huge network of factories where the poppy seeds were converted into opium. This was then not officially, but officially shipped down to Canton, and opium was siphoned off to the Chinese masses, and a lot of people became hooked on it, and that's how the British were able to secure their trade, is because the people needed their opium. So now the British had something that they could trade.
This is something that I remember studying in school, because obviously producing that much silver is very tricky. The British desperately wanted tea, which was only grown in China at the time. Both the British populace and the British government, because at one point 10% of the income of the British government was on taxes from tea. And opium was illegal in the British Empire at the time, but they found that obviously people wanted it in China because it's highly, highly addictive. And as I understand it, the pretense was, we don't care that this is illegal in our empire. You can't stop us from trading here. Let's have a little war. And the British did quite well because a lot of people were addicted to opium at the time.
Yeah. And that's where you see there's these European stereotypes of the Chinese person lazily in their opium den, not wanting to do anything but smoke opium, ignoring the fact that the British were the ones that did that to them. What I know from reading some other books is that it was extremely lucrative because the British didn't even pay the Indian workers either. They just let them keep some of the poppy seeds that they were hooked on as well.
Wow.
They would put some of the gum from the seeds in their cheek and just be high while they worked. And it was just this cycle where the British essentially paid nothing for this cultivation, and it really shattered the economy of India and Bangladesh and Pakistan because all these farmers that could before provide for themselves have switched their farms into cultivating opium and poppies, so because it was a more lucrative trade, so they had to import their food from other parts of the British Empire.
Right, wow. Got them coming and going.
Oh, of course. Our story of the Taiping Rebellion starts with a lot of coincidences. Many, many coincidences.
Okay.
And it begins with one man, our main character, and his birth name is actually Hong Xiuquan. This is not the name we know him as later on, but this is his family name, this is his birth name, that's what he goes by at this time. We can call him by his family name of Hong for simplicity's sake. Now, he was a Hakka man, Hakka. And the Hakka are in kind of an interesting position in Chinese society. They're known as like a wandering ethnic group. They're at times identify more as Han than other minorities, but on the surface of most of them look Han Chinese. But at the same time, they have their own language, they have their own cultures, and they've kind of moved from one place to another. And they started in central China, and by this time are around the provinces in the south, Guangdong, Guangxi, Fujian. To the anthropologist, do you know anything about the Hakka?
Yeah, I had a friend who was Hakka, and she was from Shenzhen, or she grew up mostly in Shenzhen, but her family was from, she said, my family's village, which is called Meizhou, and I looked at Meizhou, and the population of this village is 3 million, which shows how Chinese people think about space. But I asked her actually once, she was quite dark-skinned, relatively, and I asked if she considered herself Han, and she said yes, she was Han, but spoke Mandarin, Cantonese, and Hakka. And I asked if people in Shenzhen could understand Hakka, and she said no, not really. She could understand, as a Hakka person, could understand Cantonese fine, but people from Guangzhou, from Shenzhen, would not necessarily be able to understand Hakka.
Yeah, and Hong Kong's population, when I lived there, saw a lot of people of this ethnic group around, but it's hard to tell, as you said. But from what I know historically, a lot of the gangs of southern China, like the triads, which actually existed back in this time, which I wasn't aware of.
Oh, wow.
A lot of them are Hakka because of their sort of semi-nomadic style of life, and as well as them being perceived as outsiders by some.
Some marginalization going on.
But at the same time, they still could proceed through Chinese imperial life. I think more so now because the emperor's Manchurian. So the Han didn't even have their place at the top of the pecking order. But Hong, our main character, he was born in a village roughly 50 miles north of Canton, Guangzhou. He came to Canton to take the civil examinations in 1836 when he was 22 years old, meaning he had passed his local ones, his county ones. Now he was at the big provincial ones. And like I said, this examination system, it's incredibly rigorous. They would sleep at the desks they were at for like 3 to 10 days. It was insane. And in many ways, this civil examination that has existed for thousands of years still takes place in the Chinese education system. They have an exam called the Gaokao.
Oh, I've heard of this. It's like an incredibly stressful exam, right?
It's basically the CCP's version of these like imperial exams.
Okay.
They couldn't do away with that. That was like such a cornerstone of Chinese society that they had to keep their own rigorous exams. If you fail a Gaokao, you cannot go to university in China.
Wow.
And if you cannot go to university in China, you cannot get a good job or any job in the government. So it's incredibly stressful. Yeah, there's a lot of suicides in China every year related to Gaokao exams. So that still exists today.
Wow. Do you have an idea of the sort of things that would be in these imperial exams?
It was mainly Confucian ideology, texts, and poetry. That was mainly it. It was, you had to recite certain situations based on what Confucius and other philosophers would do in this situation. And you'd have to cite these different poems to back your claims and things like that. I don't know that from this book. I know this from some other research I've done on the examination.
Interesting. So not necessarily the most useful if you're going to be the head of, say, agricultural policy, but...
Well, I mean, tell that to the CCP officials that all have engineering degrees but are doing, doing something related to healthcare or whatever. Seems to be working for them.
I suppose so. Yeah, they're doing quite well.
But yeah, so Hong shows up to take these examinations. He's one of the only people to ever make it this far from his village. It's a very poor village. It's not a place where they have a lot of time to do rigorous study. And amongst the busy crowd, he is offered a religious text. There's always people selling these different things to help you with your exams. And he's kind of in this giant crowd and someone shoves a book in his hand. And this is a text written by Liang Afa. By the way, my pronunciation for many of these names and places in this story are going to be horrendous, so just forgive me for that. He's handed this book written by Liang Afa, and it's the first collection of Christian texts translated into Chinese in this modern iteration of China, in the missionary age of Europe. It's been illegally spreading around southern China for the past decade or so. And he's handed this text actually by a Westerner who had bribed his way and snuck into the city walls and who was dressed like a Chinese guy. But despite the book not containing the ending to any Old Testament biblical stories, the gods described in it are wrathful and cleansing of the earth. And also the god in the story, based on coincidence of translation, happens to share both parts of Hong's given names. And that's just totally by circumstance. Though Hong does not know this yet. He's just handed this book, puts it in his bag.
So instead of Yahweh, his name is Hong.
No, it's Huo Xiu is his given name.
Huh.
I want to explain the religious system of China at this time, because religion is kind of understood differently in the East than it is in the West. And I've come to know this through, friends that live in Japan and other places where you don't necessarily say you are of one religion. Like I have a friend in Tokyo who might go to a Shinto temple this weekend because he's feeling the vibe. It's very peaceful at this one. Then he'll go to a Confucian temple because there's a guy that works there that he wants some advice on for work. And then the next weekend he might go to a Zen Buddhist one to meditate. It's less of a strict religious hierarchy over there. It's more just people use these philosophies in ways that suit their lives. And this was kind of the case back then as well, in places like China, Vietnam. But one thing that's important to note is that Confucianism is less of a religion and more of, it's actually not really a religion. It's just a way that society is structured in China. You obey your father and your mother. You obey the emperor. Life is surrounded by these Confucian tenets. That's the structure of it. But then at home, local deities and ancestor worship for favor, and including worshiping the emperor, are encouraged.
Yeah. I heard it described on If Books Could Kill, which is a podcast you and I have spoken of, and if the listener is not familiar with, I would recommend, which point out that there is sort of a bit of a trope in the West that we say that China is based on Confucianism, and that's true, but in the same way that the West is kind of based on Plato, and that our stuff is based on Plato is perhaps slightly more explicit in China, but a similar kind of base level understanding of reality is Confucian, in the same way that a base level understanding of reality is Platonic in the West.
Yeah, I think that's true. And there's as many local customs as there are villages in China. I think you'd find it a fascinating place to study the traditional religions.
Sure.
Because even in Hong Kong, you could just be walking and you see all those little shrines outside of every shop or in every shop, and they might be to different types of deities, and you'll just be walking and there'll be this random temple and you're like, what is this for? They're like, oh, it's to like the mountain god, or this is to the sea god, or we do this thing for the sea. There's like a misconception of that type of worship as well, in that it's kind of understood in the West that Mao like purged China of its superstition, but I don't think that really died off in that way. I think people still follow it, if for nothing else, for like tradition, like family traditions and stuff like that. The customs in the villages, they're kind of combined with overarching ceremonies that they bring in that you see across China, and these bring in some aspects of Buddhism and Taoism as well. Hong is in Canton, and this is his second time taking the exam. He fails it again. He returns home and he falls incredibly ill after taking this second examination. During this illness, he saw vivid dreams of all the traditional mythologies that take place in China and in Asia. He battled all of them. He fought the Buddha, he fought all these local deities, and he battled them from hell up to the steps of heaven with this glowing sword, this flaming sword. And once victorious, his heavenly father commanded him that his work was not yet done, and that the demons of earth must be slain. For his mission, he's given a new name in this dream, and he is no longer Hong Xiuquan. He gives up the word of fire in his name, which was part of that godly word, and he replaces it for the word completeness. And he is now known as Hong Xiuquan, and he self-titles himself Heavenly King, Lord of the Kingly Way. At this point, he had not read that Christian book yet. This is just a dream he had after he failed his exam. And his family locks him away in that room for weeks. Like, he has a kid, he has a wife, he's like a full adult. And they're like, this guy's gone insane. So they lock him in the room for weeks because any shame he imposes on society is punished to the whole family in China. So they're like, this guy is a lunatic. He's not gonna get us in trouble. They just lock him away. Finally, he calms down. It's just this crazy dream. Life returns to normal. He goes back to being a teacher. That was his job. But he keeps his new name. That's the result of this situation. Life continues as normal for Hong. And 7 years later, in 1843, Hong's friend Li Jiangfang notices the unread Christian book in Hong's room, which Hong has never read at this point. He just kind of put it on the shelf, and he asks Hong if he could take it home and read it. He then returns, and he urges Hong to desperately read this book too. And Hong sees the messages as the key to the visions that he'd been thinking about all these years. He was thinking, what does this mean? What do these terminologies mean? And he sees now the words given to him in this Christian book with rough translations and some stories that don't make sense because they're unfinished. He sees these messages as the key to his visions. For, quote, they focus on the source of evil and the meaning of good. Now, in those 7 years since he first had those dreams, the first Opium War had occurred in China. This began in 1839. The British seized Hong Kong, which was an island off the coast of Guangdong, about a few days by boat down at the time from Canton. Nowadays, it's a couple of hours. The British, despite having far fewer forces than the Qing, they were able to win these battles with superior military technology, but the Chinese did still have overwhelming numbers. Canton itself is saved through negotiation, but the militias that had formed, all these villages, they were all flocking to the towns, every man wanted to fight. They had mustered over 20,000 men to fight the British, but the truce then enrages these locals who are ready to fight the British. It enrages them against the officials, who they believe are traitors, and a witch hunt begins for spies in the city. Because of this witch hunt, a lot of people flock to British Hong Kong for work. Others fear persecution from the mobs, and others just wish to plot against the Qing in peace and place the Ming emperors back in charge. So this leads to a growing population in British Hong Kong. It was during this time when Hong reads these words from the translation of the prophet Isaiah.
Your country is desolate, your cities are burned with fire, your land, strangers devour it in your presence, and it is desolate as overthrown by strangers.
So you can see more coincidences that apply, right?
Seems pretty apt, yeah.
Yeah. Now, these texts indicate that at the time of Jesus' coming, the echoes of it were felt all across Asia, but that the emperor of the Han dynasty 2,000 years before hid this from the historical records. That was the implication.
I see.
Hong realizes that Jesus, ever studious, did not embrace his calling until age 30, the same age Hong was now. And in the translation, Taiping refers to the era of eternal peace that Jesus was born with, and that is promised to come again. That's our first time seeing this word. I just wanted to give a definition there. In 1843, with the Opium War over, the examinations have returned to normal. Hong fails the examinations in Canton for the last time and gives up his effort, in part because he began to see Confucian teachings as misleading anyway. So he was kind of like, you know what? I don't want to do this anyway. It's not you, it's me.
Right.
Hong views the regional gods and traditions of his village as similar to the idols worshipped by the followers of Moses at Sinai when God then punished them. And by connecting many, many, many more dots that I've skipped over, some by a complete coincidence of translation. Like I said, there's a lot of these weird translations that just click for him, and it's totally coincidental. Hong comes to realize that it was God, the Lord Father, Yahuwah, in Chinese, which is kind of the Yahweh translated, just the sound of it. But those characters, they were chosen because of the sound, but to Hong, they had meaning in the substance of them, which the Europeans didn't realize when they translated it. So if this God was his father, what other logical conclusion would Hong find other than that Jesus Christ was his older brother?
Makes sense to me. It sounds logical.
Hong is a man of logic. He follows these threads, but they lead to some weird places. This kind of begins the period of wandering. Hong's friend Li, I'll just call him, becomes his first disciple. And piecing together the clues they've pulled from the translation, they baptize each other in the river to mirror Jesus and John the Baptist.
Okay.
Hong is charismatic, and he starts to convert people to his dream of an eternal peace, this Taiping, one by one. But the village grows wary. So they put a guard to watch him at his home.
What, to make sure that he's not proselytizing?
They're just kind of like, what's this guy up to?
Okay.
Like, watch this menace. But he converts the guard to his new religion. I can't say he's converting him to Christianity because it's kind of this pseudo understanding of it. It's just sort of Hong's interpretation of it. Mm-hmm. At the time, missionaries are not allowed to roam China, so there's no one to check what Hong is saying here.
Right.
And he begins to convert his cousins in nearby villages as well. Now, there's more coincidences. Only 2 psalms are translated out of, I don't know how many there are specifically, I think like 40 to 70 in the Bible, but only 2 of them are translated, and it's Psalm 19 and 33. Both use the term Xue and Quan repeatedly in that translation, which is his new name, obviously. And that was the name given before he had read the book. So all of these things just keep reaffirming to him that he is on the right path and God has chosen him for this mission. And due to his preaching, Hong is fired from his teaching position, obviously. In 1844, Hong leaves the village and sets off as a wandering preacher. First, they set off east, where the road is normally dangerous, but it's peaceful to them, and he converts many new people along the way. And this safety he has on the road also reaffirms to him that he's on the right track. On this journey, he wrote his first of many exhortations, which are his own words describing the faith for new people. In these, Hong illustrates 6 commandments to follow for salvation. This combines Confucian and Christian teachings. Number 1, never follow the path of lust. Number 2, obey your parents. 3, never kill. 4, never steal. 5, stay away from witchcraft and the magical arts.
Okay.
6, never gamble. So these are his tenets.
Okay. 6 commandments for Hong Xiuquan.
He then sets out west into Guangxi province. This is where he has a lot of family, so he finds some safety in staying with family members there. Once he's there and has these new followers, he instructs them to write their sins on paper and burn them as an offering to God in heaven. This becomes a new practice that they do as well. Like I said, he stays with his family. This area was big on the Hakka people. This is a very mountainous region as well, so very isolated. And it's in the mountains of Guangxi where Hong begins to proclaim himself as an earthly king. His open defiance to the emperor and Confucianism actually begins to draw more followers, especially amongst the Hakka people, because they had felt marginalized and at the periphery for a long time. His followers begin to be known as God worshippers in Chinese. They also begin to attract local shaman who use their respected established powers to now speak for Jesus at Hong's request. There's one in particular, we'll get to who he is later, but he's like the voice of Jesus for Hong. After several years of going back and forth from Guangdong to Guangxi, Hong in 1849 refuses to shave his forehead in the Manchu tradition, and he now wears his hair down, unkempt. This is his first open rebellion against the emperor according to the Manchu law. In February of 1850, after formally taking control of 4 villages in the mountains of Guangxi, Hong declares the beginning of a new dynasty. Essentially, like, as a mob kicked the few soldiers that were there in this rural province and these villages out.
And was this the first inkling of sort of political power he had wanted, or was he sort of preaching that he desired this political power for religious purposes before?
It's unclear at this point what his intent is. We'll get to that with some of the messages he receives from Jesus, quote unquote.
Okay.
But at the time, he is sort of liberating these 4 villages that are very isolated anyway, but he declares the beginning of a new dynasty there to replace the Qing, and now is intent to overthrow them. At this point, it's very comical. He has 4 villages.
Right.
But it's not quite unprecedented if you know Chinese history, because all dynasties started as rebels, and some of those started on the periphery and some started with very small forces. So while it is very far-fetched, I'm sure there were people proclaiming they were going to be the new king all the time that were just bandit lords and stuff.
And was it to be the Hong dynasty? Is that what he called it?
This would be the Taiping.
The Taiping Kingdom. I see. Okay.
The kingdom of eternal peace. When he does proclaim this, he invokes the Ming and the Han, which are 2 of the most respected dynasties in Chinese history. At this point in the proclamation, it's not clear that he's Hakka. He's really claiming the Han aspect here in order to appeal to the wider population, because the Qing were not popular amongst the peasantry in China. They were seen as outsiders. They were always seen as outsiders. This was no longer just strictly a religious worshipping group. Hong's god worshippers were now an army. Unfunded, untrained peasants, but a self-proclaimed army nonetheless. New recruits flock to the newly formed Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, and Jesus vouches for them via Hong shamans. He says they are true believers, let them in. Because at the time, the villages were being flooded with more people than they could handle.
Okay.
At this point, there's so many people they need to make some rules for their camp, and public punishment is inflicted on men and women in the camps who break their purity.
Oh, I see. So no canoodling.
No canoodling allowed, and we'll get to it later, but they eventually separate the sexes altogether, not only in army camps, but in the cities entirely.
And what was the appeal? Why were people flocking to Hong Xiuquan's cult, the Taiping Kingdom?
I think the initial spark comes from a materialist lens, right? These people were poor. The Qing had proven via defeat to the Western powers that they, maybe in some eyes, did not hold the mandate of heaven and did not have the power to protect the people of China.
For those who may not know, the mandate of heaven was a sort of rhetorical tool used by Chinese dynasties to say that they had divine authority to rule, and every dynasty claimed to have received the mandate of heaven in lieu of the dynasty that had come before it, who lost the mandate of heaven.
Well, and that's why Hong's claims are not super far-fetched. He's saying God has appointed me as this ruler, because that's what every emperor has said before. Yeah. And to a lot of the peasants, they don't care about the semantics of, oh, okay, I guess he's worshiping in a different way. Like, we're behind this guy, because hopefully we can boost our social strata if he does well. Like I said, a lot of them were Hakka, so they had faced a lot of hardship and discrimination in life anyway. So they were flocking to this leader who was Hakka himself, because the thought of a Hakka emperor was pretty appealing to them. And some of them were converts. So like when they arrived, they had heard this new religion and they were swayed as well. And I think a lot of them were open to hearing him out at first before really needing to commit because of the fluidness of religion in East Asia at the time anyway. So, in February of 1850, the war sort of formally begins. They begin to talk to their followers in more of a martial language. By April, Hong dons a robe of imperial yellow, which of course was punishable by death to wear the emperor's colors at all. In July, quote-unquote, Jesus tells Hong in a message that Hong should do something, and I will have you read it.
So I'm quoting Jesus in this.
You are quoting a shaman speaking for Jesus Christ in this situation.
Okay, Hong's older brother. Fight for heaven. Take responsibility for the rivers and mountains. Show the world the true laws of God the Father and the heavenly elder brother. You bear full authority to rule his kingdom.
So this is that intent you were asking about. This is the authority given by Jesus to rule the earthly kingdom. And heavenly elder brother, that's Jesus's title in in this system. From August to October of 1850, troops assemble, but the banners have not yet been unfurled. Strategies such as complex signal flag systems are being developed using the detailed books of old Chinese generals. And during drilling, soldiers must recite the 10 Commandments.
Oh, okay. So not the 6 that Hong had before, but the 10 Commandments that we think of that Moses had.
Hong's ideology changes year by year.
Sure.
I think this part comes from him receiving new translations. Though he doubles down on the old stuff as well, and it becomes quite conflicting.
And does Hong refer to himself as a Christian?
He refers to himself as the earthly king, sometimes the heavenly king, younger brother to Jesus.
Okay.
He refers to himself in those terms.
Or do the followers of Hong think of themselves as Christians? Or do they think, or is it sort of maybe the term doesn't quite work translated?
I think Hong sees the missionaries as half right. So he's not trying to follow their religion.
Sure.
He has been spoken to by God himself. So the missionaries are wrong, but they have shown him the initial way in. And now he has his own. I mean, it's the God worshippers, basically. That's what they call themselves.
The God worshippers, right. Yeah, okay.
So they are different. They see themselves as different from other Christians. They see themselves as the true people and that other people are misled. So it's up to them to show them the way if they do run into any. But there are not many Christians in China at the time. So
sure.
And one thing to note is that many of these new followers may not have truly believed in the spiritual cause at all, but this was, to them, a rebellion for the Hakka people. Just as the Mongolians and the Manchurians had been able to take the imperial throne in the past, they too may be able to get that. Thousands of Hakkas flocked to Hong due to the economic hardship and political turmoil that's Guangxi province is facing at the time. Pirates and bandits have more control than the Qing dynasty in this region. So in addition to the Hakka people, other outcasts and secret society leaders, such as the pirates and the triad gang leaders, they also flocked to Hong's cause in an effort to maybe launch themselves into a higher position in life. In December 1850, a small force of Qing troops are dispatched to investigate these rogue bandits, as Hong's people are being described as, but they're ambushed by Hong's forces, and over 50 imperial soldiers are killed. So this is the first official act of war against the Qing. The year ends with a more sizable Qing force attacking, but the Taiping rebels are able to fend them off twice. Even though they don't have the experience, this is a very mountainous, forested region, and these are locals who know the land very well. But with food running low, Hong issues a decree on January 11th, 1851, which also happens to be his birthday, for all troops to follow some new tenets. 1. Follow the 10 Commandments. 2. Keep men and women separate in camp. 3. Do not disobey even the smallest regulation from your commanders. This one's kind of similar. 4. Obey your leaders. 5. Unite your wills and strengths. Never flee from the field of combat. Some 10,000 Qing troops are sent to quell the rebellion in the mountains, so a guerrilla war is fought for about 8 months. Meanwhile, some Hakka noblemen had converted in secret down in the valleys, and they began gathering supplies and troops, even as far as Guangdong province. So they were ready on their vast estates with sometimes thousands of troops and supplies waiting for Hong to say the word for them to join the fight. In mid-August, Jesus gives him another message, stating that it was time to set out from the sacred Thistle Mountains that had been guarding them up until this point. That, quote, an earthly paradise awaited them in the direction that they could break out into. So after a series of defeats, trying to set out to the south, to the west, to the east, they finally gained victory in the northeast direction, the direction of the walled city of Yongan. And on September 25th, 1851, the city walls fall to the Taiping cannons, and 800 Qing troops lay dead. Hong had won his first earthly city.
And where did they get cannons from?
Good question. So some of these came from these nobles that were supporting Hong's cause and kind of sneaking them into the mountains. A lot of these were purchased from Europeans on the sly. So these pirates that controlled the waterways of the Pearl River, obviously buying cannons from Europeans was not allowed. but these pirates were able to do so, and some of them were part of Hong's cause, brought them back. Other ones, Hong's people just purchased them from them, and they had the funds due to the nobles that were donating to the cause.
Interesting.
Yeah. This was Hong's first chance to rule a city, more than just a village. So in Yonggan, which is in Guangxi province, Hong orders that anytime a city is captured, followers are forbidden from hoarding any loot or be severely punished. The leaders also informed the people of the city that they are not expected to join their army or convert to their religion. However, rewards are promised to those who aid the cause, and execution is threatened to those that aid the, quote, demon army of the Qing. The only loot that is taken in the city is from the estates of wealthy lords that fled.
Okay.
Their wealth is distributed to the villagers that lived around those estates, and then the rest is deposited into the city treasury. So in order to win favor with the peasants, he distributed the wealth among them first.
Okay. Bit of a Robin Hood situation going on there.
Yeah. Pooling wealth for the common good is cited as being derived from both Chinese tradition and Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, according to Hong. Hong declares a Taiping calendar, which is suspiciously similar to the Western calendar.
Right.
New hereditary titles are given to family members who have died for the cause or proven worthy in their devotion. All this to encourage more devotion later on. This includes giving the title of king to his 5 closest commanders. One of those commanders is his friend Li, who was his first convert. One of those is also the voice of Jesus, Xiao Gui. But yeah, so he has these kings that have the title of directions, like the North King, the West King, the South King, the Loyal King. And these are like the guys right below him in the hierarchy.
So there was North, South, East, West, and Loyal.
There was also Wing.
Okay, Wing, interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. But they were the big boys in the army. And it's just funny because a lot of them came from nothing, just like Hong. The voice of Jesus was this poor shaman guy from the mountains, and the Loyal King was just Hong's friend that he grew up with. But has now proven himself to be a very good commander after a year of drilling and training. Hong fortifies the city with 20,000 soldiers, but by December of 1851, the Qing launch a counterattack of 46,000 troops. During this battle, the man who served as the primary role for the voice of Jesus, Xiao Gui, the West King, is mortally wounded, and he gives one last message from Jesus to Hong on his deathbed.
Fulfillment as man does not come from a life at ease. The deeper your suffering, the more awe-inspiring your reputation. Let your mind be at rest. Whether those demon devils fly or change their form, they will never escape the hands of the Heavenly Father and Heavenly Elder Brother.
In the Taiping record, Jesus comes no more to earth, and his voice is silenced.
Oh, so there was no more prophet. That was it. That was the final message from Jesus to Hong Xiuquan and the God worshippers.
We'll see some other messages come through in a bit, but that was the last official one from Jesus, the elder brother.
Okay.
And the last one that I'm guessing Hong trusted fully.
Interesting. So the West King was something of a Rasputin figure.
Very much so. Yeah, he separated himself out from the other shaman in that Hong seemed to really trust his voice as more than just heavenly voices, as one specific to Jesus himself.
Interesting.
But yeah. So he is no more. And during the siege of Yonggan, Hong codifies a military handbook for discipline and morality. In order to codify exceptions for himself, of course, Hong, of course, grants official titles of consorts to the new women in his life. It's also ordered that jealousy between, quote, sister-in-laws was punishable by death.
Wow, okay.
Despite this being fairly common for emperors, Hong issues that any gossip of the royal family is also punishable by death.
Wow.
Keep in mind, this is a fairly small city he controls, but he's kind of getting that emperor mentality already.
Yeah, I mean, I look, even today, the population is like 320,000. So by Chinese standards, teeny tiny.
By Chinese standards, that's like Albany, New York. Anyway, convinced this city was not the promised land, the Taiping stage a breakout using combat strategies that were very uncommon at the time. On the night of April 5th, 1852, Taiping forces leave the city through the East Gate. They set off explosive mines that encircle the ring defenses around the whole city to confuse the Qing forces. They also strap metal to dogs and pigs and set them loose so that way the Qing don't know where the soldiers are and are very confused amongst this chaos. And upon retreating into the mountains, the Taiping plant mines in the mountain passes that they explode as they're being pursued, killing hundreds of Qing men, though they did lose about 2,000 soldiers in this retreat.
Wow.
But it's just kind of interesting seeing the dynamic, which is a dynasty rebellion, which had very traditional warfare before this, now having guerrilla warfare tactics and bombs. And this comes at a time in history where there wasn't a lot of big warfare between the European powers, but a lot of technology developing, which is kind of why the Europeans sent observers to the American Civil War in the 1860s to see how these new military technologies were actually used. Now, in this case, this is just the scraps they could find from those that made their way up into China, but very unprecedented until this point. Now they set off on their search for this earthly kingdom. They set off from Yongan with about 40,000 people, including 1,000 miners and engineers from Yongan, which is very important for siege warfare. But it's important to note that in Hong's army, he does not only allow men to fight, but any woman that wants to fight and is able-bodied enough to do so, they have their own regiments within his army as well. So when they do talk about the combatants, some of these were women within the ranks. They come to the city of Guilin, which I think is a bit larger, and this is where many trademarks of the Taiping conquest come about. Some disguise themselves at times as the Qing troops when they're on spying missions or trying to sneak into the city. Bribing generals of the Qing and bribing officials also comes about. It's shown that it works, that sometimes these generals that are out here in the periphery of the empire don't care that much to put their lives on the line and can be bought. Seizing of large riverboats to form a massive fleet that can transport goods, that starts here. And these boats can effectively transport food, weapons, and the elderly and the children. Guilin is in that region of Guangxi that people would think about if I tell you to close your eyes and picture Chinese nature. It's sort of those avatar mountains.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Beautiful. And hard to fight a war in, I imagine.
I imagine as well. But Hong's army is very familiar with the region. Again, an advantage they have over Qing troops that were sometimes sent from other parts of China. They're unable to take Guilin. They try, but word of Qing reinforcements arrives and they deem it too deadly to stick around. But it was in this that they learned that even the most famed Chinese generals can be bribed to let them retreat unaccosted, which is what happened here. They just told him, hey, we're going to go. Can we pay you to leave? And he said, sure. They moved north. In passing the city of Quanzhou, the South King, Feng Yunshan, is mortally wounded. He's riding around in his decked out carriage, riding past the city walls, and a soldier decides to take a shot at him and direct hit in his ornamental chair. And the Taiping were going to just pass this city and leave it alone. But out of an act of revenge, the soldiers assault the city wave after wave, just throwing their bodies at the walls of the city. And neighboring Qing generals fear to even aid the city due to the ferocity of the Taiping rebels in their rebellious rage. And they breach the city on June 3rd, 1852, and they attack everyone with no quarter. Unlike how they had previously treated a siege, they killed every resident of Quanzhou.
Wow, so get pretty, what would today be considered a war crime?
Yeah, absolutely. Continuing north, the Taiping are ambushed by a local force crossing into Hunan province. 300 of their boats are sunk, and many of Hong's original followers drown. The remaining forces flee and face further ambushes until they reach and take the city of Daozhou.
Do you have an idea for how many boats were remaining? 300 sounds like an awful lot.
It was a majority. I think they had around 400 and 300 sank. So they would have to look to changing the strategy at this point. They took this city of Daozhou and they kind of became desperate. They used the city as a base for raiding, particularly looting local temples, which they would loot and burn to the ground. And in order to attract new followers, because their forces had been depleted, the Taiping post notices around southern Hunan, focusing on degrading the Qing emperor, who many in this region were fed up with. The secret societies, like the triads, had used jingles before to attract members.
Okay.
And these jingles would appeal to a sense of proto-class consciousness. And the Taiping adjusted the lyrics of some of the more famous ones with the same tune. And I don't know what the tune is, since I read it in a book, but
sure.
Here's one of the jingles that the Taiping were using in southern Hunan to try to attract followers. Can you read it for us?
Sure. Those with millions owe us their money. Those who are half poor, half rich can till their fields. Those with ambition but no cash should go with us, broke or hungry. Heaven will keep you well. I imagine it's much catchier in Hakka or Cantonese or Mandarin or whatever language it happened to be in.
Yeah, I think they're using Cantonese, but potentially Mandarin. I'm not sure about Hunan province. But yeah, this proved actually really effective, appealing to that sense of material conditions, right? Rather than join our heavenly cause. It was, hey, we'll help you out. We'll feed you. We'll arm you. We'll help you achieve more in life. And in this, they were appealing to a wider sense of righteousness in their cause for the common man, emancipation in the fact that, quote, all Chinese are God's children, according to Hong. And the messaging works. Shortly after his campaign, with jingles and everything, 30,000 people from Hunan joined the Taiping cause, bringing their total to around 50,000 able-bodied troops. In October, the Taiping reach the most powerful city they've seen yet, Changsha. The 30,000 troops there are commanded by the governor of Hunan, Liu Bingjiang, who was actually from Hong's home county, his little rural county, and had fulfilled everything Hong had ever dreamed of when he was younger. He aced the examinations, he achieved a place at Peking's bureaucratic academy, he climbed the ranks of government, and now had become an esteemed governor. So this was personal for Hong. He really wanted to defeat this guy, but after the Taiping had been able to rebuild their fleet with the stolen boats from the harbor, they ended up moving on because word of 50,000 Qing troops were incoming to the area. So they did manage to refill their fleet there. And for those listening, the Chinese rivers on this system are massive. So an army can easily sail down these. Using the skills and knowledge of local people recruited to their cause, they navigated to the capital of Hubei province, Wuchang. They take the city after a month-long siege and hard-fought battles. Amidst this, many people of the city defect to the Taiping cause when they are ordered to burn their homes for the defense of the city. Some of them just left and defected. The Taiping took the city on January 12th, 1853, and now control a port city on the mighty Yangtze River. Since this was such a large and prosperous city, the Taiping treasury is refilled tenfold. Their arms are restocked with the best the Qing could offer, and new recruits are found amongst the city's population and prisons. This time, the Taiping law is strictly enforced, and even families are separated so that men and women are in different parts of the city.
Wow. So you have a city with like a male zone and a female zone?
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
Before the Qing emperor can even gather his breath about what to do about the Taiping rebels, he received word that the rebels had left Wuchang. The city's resources gone, along with 2,000 boats commandeered, along with all their crews, and 10,000 more followers. Hong realizes that speed is everything. He relaxes some of the restrictions on separating families while they're on the boats and enforces no dress code. So at this time, he was making people not have their hair up in the Manchu way, and he just said, okay, you can do what you want.
Wow.
At this point, it's an unspoken fact that the earthly paradise has been identified. The city of Nanjing, or Nanking, either way. And it's some 600 miles down the river. It's the heart of China's richest province, Jiangsu. It's the heart of scholarly work in China, apart from Peking, and the capital of the founding emperor of the Ming Dynasty 500 years before. So it's symbolically very important. The name Nanjing means southern capital. They moved quickly, sacking weak cities and towns where they could, and avoid the heavily defended ones along the Yangtze River. Spies and emissaries are sent ahead of the armada, and inhabitants of these towns and villages are told if they write Shun, aka obedient, on their doors, then no harm will come to them when their towns are sacked.
Very biblical, very 7 Plagues of Egypt.
Yeah, it is. These emissaries tell the Buddhist and Taoist monks that they will be beheaded if they do not abandon their temples. And within 30 days, they've covered 600 miles and reached the imposing and vast walls of Nanjing.
600 miles in 30 days. Wow. So that's 20 miles a day.
Yeah, with 60 or 70,000 people. Yeah.
Wow, amazing.
Using British intelligence from the Opium Wars, the Taiping note that the wall's circumference is too vast to be defended properly. The city's size would be its downfall. So on March 19th, 1853, the city's outer walls are breached. And within 10 days, 50,000 Qing troops guarding the citadel have fallen. They're all killed or kill themselves.
How many thousand, sorry?
50,000.
Wow.
Yeah. The numbers in Chinese history are pretty vast.
There were 50,000 troops defending
When I say this, well, that's just one part of the city too. It was
Wow.
defending the central citadel. It's a huge city. I don't know how many
Yeah.
at this time, but it's massive.
Yeah.
So 10 days later, on March 29th, Hong Xiuquan is carried into the city on a golden palanquin with great fanfare. The people of Nanjing prostrate themselves as he rides by, and the Taiping have established their earthly paradise.
Okay, so he did it. Problem solved. He has established the Taiping Kingdom. The end.
The end. With that, we will end part 1 of our story on the Taiping Rebellion. Stay tuned next week for part 2 and to see what life is like in this heavenly kingdom.
I, for one, cannot wait.